Hey everyone, this is a new trial that started on Friday. It is the Christopher Wolfenbarger trial. He is accused of taking the life of his wife, Melissa, way back in 1998 to 1999. So, we will do the prosecutor's opening statement, and then in my next video, I will do the defense's opening statement. Both of them are extremely different in how they're explaining away what's going on. So, in my opinion, this is an extremely interesting case, especially since, according to the evidence and the defense's opening statement, which obviously is not evidence, but they're expected to prove that throughout the case. And whenever it's not there, just say, like, haha, he did it. I think it makes it way more interesting to watch these trials. So I will begin with, like I said, the prosecutor's opening statement on this video.
Christopher Wolfenbarger, when she would not talk to her sister for a period of time, but she would always keep in touch with her mother. Most importantly, she never let a holiday go by without calling or visiting. In November of 1998, Melissa had the intent to visit her mother for Thanksgiving. They spoke. One of the things that Melissa was really looking forward to was getting a photograph of her pawpaw, her grandfather, the father of Carl Patton, Melissa's son. And that is Carl Patton, Melissa's father. And that is the husband of Norma Patton. She wanted that photo. And Norma Patton expected that at some point between Thanksgiving, even though she didn't get an opportunity to go visit her mom, that she would get that photograph. Well, when Christmas came around, she was concerned that she didn't hear from her. But by the time she got to February, she knew something was wrong. Melissa never would let that much time go without talking to her mom, not especially during that period of time, not on her birthday. Well, it took some time for authorities to be alerted, because you're going to hear that Melissa wasn't reported missing until January of 2000. And that was because this defendant, Christopher Wolfenbarger, you're going to hear from his own words. You're going to hear what he told the detectives, what he told his children. He never looked for her. He never reported her missing. So when Norma Patton and Tina Patton are looking for Melissa, where is she? She's not working anymore. She worked at Waffle House. She's not showing up to her job. She's not looking after her children. Not checking on her children. No word. Well, the authorities tell them that, well, Melissa is 21. She's married. She's got her own life. If she hasn't called you, then maybe she doesn't want to talk to you. Her husband hasn't reported her missing. And you hadn't talked to her in a month. Well, not really much for us to do right now. But eventually, Melissa's mother goes to Henry County, and they start an investigation. But even though they talked to friends and family, they even talked to Christopher. And all they get from him is she just left. That's it. That goes on for 3 years. She is unidentified for 3 years. And that takes us to really when we locate the remains of Melissa Wolfenbarger. They were located on 2 different days. April 29th and June 3rd of 1999. Now, April 29th, George George McKeetrick is driving on the area, heard questions about Avon Avenue. That location is the location of Action Glass Company. You're going to hear that is the location where Christopher Wolfenbarger works. Glass Company, kind of a manufacturing plant. They have industrial equipment at this location. That's where he works. Although they had no reason to think that that was anything significant at the time, because in April 29th of 1999, all they knew was that there was a head in the roadway, partially, fully, pretty much fully decomposed. And Mr. McKeetrick George McKeetrick is driving on that in that area on Avon Avenue, and he sees something that he thinks is kind of odd. So he stops and looks at it, goes and gets his daughter, and comes back, and he can see what clearly is a human head. Something that he would tell you he couldn't believe with his own eyes, or what he couldn't believe. Well, that begins the discovery and really the process of trying to identify that skull. That's those same detective, the lead detective at that time is Dale Kelly. You're going to hear from the Fulton County Medical Examiners, investigators, Tina Miller. They were all out there at the location on Avon Avenue on April 29, 1999, collecting evidence, taking photographs, some of which you'll see. So ultimately, they start looking for information on who this could belong to. Then you find the extremities on June 3rd, 1999. Now, these extremities are found, everything but the torso, or everything but the midsection of Melissa Wolfenbarger is located. Femurs, and you'll hear from the detectives, you'll hear from the medical examiners. When the skull was found, it had a portion of the spine attached to the skull, and it appeared as though it had been severed or removed with some type of circular saw. The extremities were examined. Detectives, medical examiners, the anthropologists who worked for the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office, they observed signs of tool marks. The anthropologist describes the different lines on the bones as what happens when a saw is attempting to catch a groove and actually make a cut. You'll see the bones where there's the saw marks on the finger of Melissa Wolfenbarger. You will see the end of the finger where it appears as though you see ridges on the bone where that saw cut. But even on June 3rd of 1999, they didn't have these cases connected. They were found about 50, 60 feet from each other in that same area. They didn't have a basis to connect to. They were in the medical examiner's office as two separate case files. Skull found on Avon Avenue. And extremities found almost 2 months later on Avon Avenue. It's expected that the cases may be connected, but they didn't have what you needed to actually combine and connect the cases and say they were the same person.
Okay, so as you can see, she was unidentified for 3 years. She wasn't reported missing during that time. Eventually, she was reported missing. There's some sketchy stuff going on with like her mom and dad. It's like they suspected that something was off because they hadn't heard from her during the holidays and whatever, but you never reported her missing during that whole time. So this is all weird when it all starts to come out, especially when the defense's opening comes out. Now, as you heard, her middle section, the torso, was never found. All they found were what was listed on the screen. I'm not going to repeat it because I'm sure you guys can read it just fine. The prosecutor will go on to say that Christopher was the prime suspect in all of this. Allegedly, he was hitting her and leaving marks on her. I'm not going to say the actual words because I don't want to get in trouble on here. July 29th, 1998, I guess, Melissa had a TRO that she had requested, but she did drop that. Prosecution says one thing and the defense will say something different. So you'll see how they differ from each other.
And I'll tell you that at the time they did find an identity and were able to determine the identity of Skull and the Trinities, Christopher Wolfenbarger was the primary suspect. I'll just tell you that. He was the person, the main person that they were looking at. He wasn't the only person, because you got to conduct a thorough sifting investigation, but they had evidence that Christopher and Melissa were involved in a tumultuous relationship, that Christopher was abusive, that he had struck her on multiple occasions. They had evidence that he had caused a black eye, that she had witnesses that observed bruises on her neck. They had evidence that at some point Melissa applied for a protective order to prevent contact with this defendant. You're also going to hear that on the day that Christopher was ordered to come to court, March 29th, ordered to come to court on July 29th of 1998, you will see that that same day, Melissa appeared and requested for that case to be dismissed. Roughly 7 days after she was hit, 7 days after she went personally and applied for a protective order, 7 days after that, she goes back down to the courthouse and asks for it to be dismissed by the prosecutor. You're going to hear from a lot of witnesses in this case. You're also going to hear from the domestic violence expert. That domestic violence expert will be able to explain that that is not uncommon at all. The victims of domestic violence to come back and say, I want to prosecute. You want to hear about some of the reasons why that can happen.
The prosecutor goes on to talk about, so the charges were dropped. Obviously, it was going to go on to trial, which would have been March of 1999. When it was due to come up for trial, Melissa couldn't be located, so she never showed up for trial. The prosecutor goes on to talk about this is, a case of DV. Melissa told her mom and sister about the July 1998 incident, which is, Chris hitting her. Supposedly Melissa's sister observed marks on Melissa's neck like she had been choked. She worked at Waffle House with her sister, I guess, and that's during the time that this was seen.
This is a case about domestic violence. In addition to the evidence of the physical bruises on the person of Melissa Wolfenbarger, you're going to hear from her family. Her mother knew about the July 1998 attack. Melissa told her about it. She told her mother how Christopher was upset, wanted her to come back, and how he struck her in the face, how he grabbed her and dragged her by the hair. Uncle was arrested. Her mother was one of the persons that she told about that July incident. You're also going to hear from her sister, Tina Patton, who occasionally worked. Well, one time in particular in 1998, there was a 2 or 3 month period where Tina Patton, Melissa's sister, worked at a Waffle House. I believe it was Virginia Avenue Waffle House. They worked at a few Waffle Houses that year. Melissa didn't take her. But during that period, in the early part of 1998, Melissa and Tina Patton worked at the Waffle House. And she would tell you that there was one day that she observed, while she was working with Melissa during that period, she observed marks on the neck of Melissa, around the sides, And she knew immediately it looked, and she'll tell you this, it looked like someone had choked Melissa. And Melissa told her that, defendant, Christopher Wolfenbarger. And you're going to hear from a man that Melissa was seeing right when she died. You're going to hear that Melissa planned on leaving this defendant. You're going to hear from his own mouth that they weren't on good terms when she died, when she went missing. Thomas Dixon was also working at a Waffle House when he met Melissa Wolfenbarger. And towards the end of 1998, they started seeing each other. And at one point, Melissa was staying in a lodge or hotel with Thomas Dixon. And he'll tell you that he was fully aware that she was with this defendant, Christopher Wolfenbarger, but he'll tell you that she wanted to leave. And during that week, she was staying with him. She fully planned on doing that, but decided to go back to him, to Christopher in particular, to see her children. She missed him. And Thomas Dixon will tell you that the last time he saw Melissa Wolfenbarger, Christopher Wolfenbarger came up to that Waffle House. Melissa and Christopher had a talk, and Melissa got hysterical, started crying. Thomas Dixon will tell you that he went outside to go talk to Christopher and told him that he has to leave until 9 o'clock, that she gets off. You're going to hear Thomas Dixon tell you that when Christopher left, he peeled out in his Volkswagen, and that was the last time he saw Melissa. He'll tell you that she never came back to work at Waffle House. She never called, she never texted. And that is the evidence to show that's consistent with what you'll hear from her mother and sister regarding the last time either one of them saw her.
Okay, we'll move forward a little bit to, I guess, Melissa doesn't ultimately get ID'd until 2003. Melissa's father was arrested for multiple taking people's lives. His arrest ultimately triggered them trying to ID Melissa because he's telling them to please find my daughter, you know, where is she at? And they ended up looking into the unidentified case that they had. Melissa's father, Carl Patton, he pled guilty to, like I said, multiple taking people's lives. And the wife, which is Melissa's mom, was also involved in all of this. So stuff gets kind of weird. Interesting, in my opinion.
Until 2003. And what triggered the identification ultimately is the arrest of Melissa Wolfenbarger's father. You're going to hear that Melissa Wolfenbarger's father essentially pled guilty to committing murder himself, committing multiple murders himself. And when he was arrested, it was a notorious publication, it was a notorious arrest. It garnered a lot of attention. You're going to hear that Carl Patton asked the lead detective when he was arrested after he confessed. He asked the detective, told him that his daughter was missing for 3 years, he had no leads. He asked if he could find his daughter. Well, back to Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office, we had this unidentified skull they found 3 years ago. And with Carl Patton's statement, they obtained the medical dental records from Melissa Wolfenbarger's dentist, William Grant, who had a pediatric practice in the 80s and 90s. He obtained Melissa's original records, x-rays, and they Dr. Meredith Hoffman, forensic dentist at the medical examiner's office, x-rays, looked at the fillings, looked at the dimensions of the teeth, and was able to make a conclusive determination that the skull that was found in April 1999 was in fact the skull that belongs to Melissa Wolfenbarger, because no records matched the impressions that she took from the skull. It was a match. That's when all the location of the job, that's when all the location of the house, the location of the extremities, and the skull between the job, that's when all that comes in. And that's already a suspect. So that's when they're really focusing on this.
Okay, so here's my thought. All right. Melissa was seeing somebody else, and she was spending time away from home. Later, you're going to hear about her giving away her kids pretty much to Chris's mom and letting her have all guardianship. So you're seeing somebody else, and for Chris to say, well, she just left, is that unreasonable? I don't think so. If she's seeing somebody else, she doesn't want the kids, she's not even really staying there. So this next part, with the prosecutor, he's going to mention Melissa's daughter, Christy. Okay, they have a kid together, which is Christy and Joey. The daughter says that Chris, after Melissa disappeared, got rid of all of her belongings. But later you're going to find out, from the defense anyway, that Christy didn't even live with them. She didn't live there. So how would she know that?
Mother kind of disappeared one day. And to tell you that, one of the oddest things that she cannot reconcile is almost immediately after Melissa just vanished, this defendant essentially just removes all of her stuff out of the house. You can see the pictures of mother, belongings, things of that nature. She's gone. While she was growing up, she would constantly ask him, "Where's my mother?" And you would expect that you would have heard an answer at some point, some type of explanation, which she would tell you that he never answered her question. He never told her I looked for her. He never told her I ever reported her missing. Nothing. In fact, she would tell you that this defendant would tell her while he was growing up that he knows how to get rid of a body. He knows how to not get caught. He also told his daughter, and you will hear this from her mouth, that he had a place to go on the run if he needed to. Now, Christina Wolfenbarger, grew up in basically being cared for by Kathy Wolfenbarger, Christopher Wolfenbarger's biological mother. She lived in the house until she was able to leave when she became an adult. You're going to hear that when she left the house of grandmother, when she was able to get out on her own, that's when law enforcement gets that information from her around 2015, 2017. That information about what he told her while she was growing up. You're going to hear from Dorothy Jones. That Dorothy Jones is a resident of that neighborhood at that around that 800 Wolfenbarger Road area, close to the Action Glass Company where Christopher Wolfenbarger worked, close to the location where Melissa Wolfenbarger's skull was located, close to the location where Melissa Wolfenbarger's remains were located. Dorothy Jones is familiar with that location, and essentially what she's going to tell you is she pretty much hung out with Christopher pretty much every day during that period. She remembers him. She remembers Melissa. She remembers seeing signs of Melissa being abused. She would tell you that she saw Melissa with the black eye herself, that she'd been punched in the eye. She's also going to tell you that she's heard them fighting at that house last week. Probably the most disturbing thing she's going to tell you is that she saw him every day for about a 10-year period. And just one day, Melissa was gone, never saw her again, and Chris was gone. And she said, not only gone, but just kind of left all the stuff.
Now you're going to hear the prosecutor talk about when Christopher was arrested. Not until 2024.
2024. And it did not go like a typical execution of a warrant for a homicide, because it took quite a bit of time to locate this offender. In fact, they didn't locate him in the residence portion of the house. They located him inside area of the garage that was situated for living space. They found him in a something that looks the evidence to show it has the appearance that it was created for the purpose of the house. That's what the evidence is going to show. After about 40 to 50 minutes, they get the dogs, and you just can't hide from the dogs, right? The dogs hit, come on out of there. You see, that's what you're going to get. But he crawls out of there after an hour. And evidence is going to show he knew exactly who that is from. Your determination, your decision as to you do why. I submit to you, it will be clear. It will be clear. They were there to find him. Arrest this defendant for the murder of his wife. Arrest this defendant for dismembering his wife. They were there to arrest him and hold him accountable for taking Melissa Wolfenbarger from her mother and sister, most important, her children. At the conclusion of this case, the evidence, testimony, the exhibits, you will be left with one decision, and that's to vote the truth. And I submit to you, the truth will be guilty. Both counts of the state indictment for the murder of Melissa Wolfenbarger.
Okay, so that is all of the prosecution's opening statement. Don't have any judgment yet until you hear the defense's opening if you have not heard anything about this case yet. Because everything the defense says either turns everything upside down for the prosecution or it explains away certain key points that the prosecution tried to put out there. So, my next video I will make with the defense's opening statements, and it will probably be released tomorrow. I will try to release it later today, but I don't know if I will get to that. So, till next time, goodbye.